Welcome to the Ecom Collab Club podcast, where e-commerce founders and operators share the mistakes that drained their cash, wasted their time, and nearly broke their brains, so you could avoid that pain.
Fucking great. No one ever listens to me.
Hosted by Adam Pearce, co-founder of the Ecom Collab Club, and Blend Commerce, the Shopify CRO agency.
All right, guys. So every D2C brand with a subscription has the same slide in their board deck. We're investing in retention. Well, what does it actually mean? What it means is they've got 14 Klaviyo flows. They've hired a lifecycle marketer and A/B testing subject lines where 40% of their subscribers disappear within 3 months. So meanwhile, look, paid media is pumping in subscribers who are never going to stick around. Pricing was set to win the first order, not to sustain the relationship. Failed payments are quietly bleeding revenue and no one's even watching. And the retention team is trying to fix all of this with, you guessed it, emails. Now, today, we are going to pull apart some of the real causes of subscription churn and the structural stuff that no Klaviyo flow will ever fix. So back again, after 15 years of subscriptions experience across Sky, BT, News UK, NFL, Game Pass, Tennis TV, and more, now running FILDI, helping scale up, stop the bleeding, Craig the Lord returned to the ECC podcast. Welcome back, sir.
Hello. We both got the memo of black t-shirt and glasses, by the way. I didn't mention that to you earlier.
Yeah, we kind of look like one of those aging boy bands like 911 and Boyzone that kind of do these like random tours in very weird venues. But, you know, I like it. We coordinated.
100%.
Beautiful. Now, Craig, let's get into this, sir. Now, when you were on the podcast last time, it was great because we had a lot of good conversation about subscriptions. The theme is related but different today. What I want to do first of all is 30-second version of who the hell are you, what does FILDI do, and who do you typically work with? Please, sir.
30 seconds. All right. So, I mean, you did a fairly decent introduction earlier. I come from... Thank you. I come from 15 years of deep subscriptions expertise. So my career has just been in subscriptions at large corporates. So, but always direct to consumer, Sky, BT, all the stuff that you mentioned earlier. FILDI exists as a subscriptions growth consultancy or partnership advisory. And FILDI was specifically designed to help direct-to-consumer startups and scale-ups build, understand, and grow subscription revenues for D2C, primarily operating for those that operate within the Shopify ecosystem. But for brands that are thinking about running subscriptions or already have a subscriptions business and need support, FILDI is specifically designed to help those clients.
I mean, that was very eloquent and actually, I think, broadly within the 30-second limit.
Thank you. That was good. Yeah, that wasn't scripted either. That was just off
from the heart.
Yeah.
Now, look, I know that the intro was a little bit punchy there, but ultimately, I think you and I are old enough and long in the tooth enough to know that actually there is a lot of fluff in e-com and a lot of hot air. And I know previously, kind of when you and I have spoken about retention and equally on the podcast that you've been on as well, you said about obviously sort of in the D2C scale-up word that actually when people say retention, what they just mean is we've got a bunch of Klaviyo flows that we've done. What do you mean by that when you say that, and why kind of is that a problem as well?
So let me be clear on Klaviyo emails communication specifically related to existing customer management. So Klaviyo is a brilliant marketing tool, an absolutely fantastic marketing tool, but it's not a problem solver, right? So retention, and I'm going to talk specifically about subscribers. I'm not talking about repeat purchase. That's just not my bag. This is specifically about subscriptions. And I'm specifically talking about the use of email to talk to existing subscribers for whatever reason. Retention for subscriptions is about how you manage thousands of relationships at a one-to-one level, or as close to one-to-one as you can get, over months or years. So this is long-term relationships at scale. Now, retention is obviously cancellation prevention, or just preventing churn. But the reasons people leave could be due to the audience type that they came on. So they might have actually been a cold audience type to start with. It could be due to the price. It could be due to the proposition that's being sold, or it could be passive churn, which we'll probably talk about later. Now, what Klaviyo is really good at, and equivalent platforms are really good at, is it operates at the surface to fix essentially the symptom. It's not, like I say, it's not a problem solver. So and I think the other thing is email or communications they're quite easy to measure their effectiveness by way of open rate or click-through rate or revenue attribution. So it gives numbers really quickly to give a vibe in terms of underlying performance. But just because it's easy to measure doesn't necessarily mean it's solving the underlying churn problem. So it might be saving customers by saying something and you can see the attribution fairly quickly, but it's still not solving the underlying problem, which is causing that customer to churn in the first place. And that's the sort of slight beef that I have with this sort of narrative at the moment with regards to, look, I do think that Klaviyo plays a really important role in customer retention, but it's not the answer to the customer retention problem. It is the way of serving information to customers that answer back to a strategy to deal with that problem, if that sort of makes sense. I'm not sure whether I'm being particularly clear on that. The analogy, just before we move on, the analogy that I've started to use quite a lot is using Klaviyo to solve a customer retention problem is like buying a better mop when the roof is leaking. Like, you can clean the floor, you can dry the floor, so you can say, I've solved this, the floor is dry, but the roof is still leaking. So you're you're not really solving the problem. The symptom is a wet floor, therefore I buy a mop to dry the wet floor, whereas actually the roof is leaking. So we have to fix the roof. And that's, I think, the distinction that I try to use quite a lot to explain, I guess, how Klaviyo sits and actually how FILDI then deals with the underlying problem to solve the problem. Does that make sense?
No, it does. And I suppose the question probably on people's lips then is, well, if emails isn't retention, what actually does or should it mean when they are working on retention? And what is that problem with the roof that we're going to fix? Like, what are those things?
Yeah. So, I mean, customer retention or customer churn is largely the outcome of a system. And I don't mean system as in a like piece of technology. I mean a retention system, right? So the system, the conceptual system, has like 4 layers. I've sort of covered these earlier. The first one is acquisition quality. So what was the quality of the customer? What was the quality of the journey that customer took prior to actually buying the product? Did they really want it? Were they a warm audience? Or were they a bit colder and you just got them to convert? So that obviously affects retention. We'll probably cover that later on. Pricing / discounting, massive impact on customer retention, but also the proposition. So what are you selling to the customer? And is it fit for a recurring delivery? The ongoing service that the customer receives whilst being a subscriber, and I guess by extension, the underlying operation that you've got to service that customer, be it customer services, be it logistics, be it, communicating to the customers in terms of what to expect, in terms of checkpoints, all of that sort of stuff. And then the final piece, which relates back to the Klaviyo piece, is the communication angle. So again, I need to emphasize that it is an important part of retention, but it's not the sole part of retention. So communication is fundamentally important to ensure that customers feel valued. They've got this sort of impression of a one-to-one relationship. But most brands operate on that final layer with regards to communication and call that a retention strategy. That's not really the case. There are other layers that need to be considered that ultimately influence retention that can't be solved simply by communicating to a customer and maybe reacting to an action they've already taken. So the real work is actually understanding the pinch points that exist within all of those 4 different layers and then removing those pinch points as much as you possibly can. So there is less of a reliance on communication as an overall tactic to improve retention. So yeah, you can't fix the system without, you can't fix the outcome without fixing the system. And I think that's the key point here. It's not surface level, that you need a real good understanding of how things actually operate, find those pinch points, solve those pinch points, and then your retention will improve.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like to me like you're also, this hits home with me because I hate e-commerce. The way it's talked about is that there are a bunch of these silos that work independently, and there's never really a thread that kind of holds everything together. And I kind of think that this is probably the issue that we come across as an agency from a CRO point of view, is that there is this kind of eventually this realization that CRO is linked to SEO, CRO is linked to PPC, CRO linked to email, and ultimately you need all of those things to be happening. It sounds like here you're kind of saying the same thing in the sense of, from that retention point of view, subscription, people generally do the first bit fairly well, and the last bit, when things aren't going well, they can do well, but all the stuff in the middle, the real important stuff for that relationship, is just not threaded together nicely.
I mean, that's a really interesting point to make, actually. I guess the argument, and I do see this a lot, within each individual silo, the teams are operating very well. And this is not just exclusive to D2C startups and scale up like brands that you and I work with. This exists in corporate as well. You know, a lot of these teams operate in silos, and they operate based on the performance measures that they have been given, and they use everything in their control in order to achieve that, right? But actually, the conversations that you and I have had previously about clients, the work that you and I have done previously in clients, is that there needs to be a recognition that actually, from a subscriptions perspective, specifically, there needs to be a holistic view of everything and how everything fits together in order to improve underlying net retention. So if you've got an acquisitions team that are primarily or actually solely judged on the amount of customers that they get through the door, there is no real incentive for that acquisition team to focus on customer quality. They will look at CAC, amount of customers that have actually bought, maybe the amount of AOV that's been driven through. I'm not dismissing that as a really important point, but my point is that if there isn't then a viewpoint of what's the effectiveness of that new customer coming through, how many of those customers are still with us in 3 months, to then determine whether that paid media channel operated well or not, that's a question that's not really being asked at the moment. And you can only really ask that question if you have more of a holistic appreciation of how everything connects together.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I think it's probably worth us going back to that point, because you mentioned paid media there, and I think going back to the acquisition thing, because this is something I heard you talk about before. You know, you got quite a strong view on this, is that subscription churn generally is an acquisition problem. Walk us through what you mean by that and how that kind of filters down.
So we covered paid media. I'll just cover off paid media just to kind of cover it off again. There was always been an emphasis on customer acquisition cost and optimizing that as much as possible. But obviously, it's becoming more and more expensive to acquire customers because, you know, those platforms are increasing their fees. It's harder to target the right customers, and the market's just a lot noisier. And therefore, it's a real balance of spending the right amount of money to get the right type of customer. So again, to my point earlier, if the acquisitions function is only measured, the success of the acquisition function is only measured by the amount of customers that come through, and the measure of success is based on customer acquisition cost, then there's no real incentive for them to get good quality customers. So essentially, they're just conceptually throwing customers over the fence to the retention team, and the retention team are like, most of these customers are going to leave. So like, you've just got the general paid media function. It sounds like I'm attacking the acquisition function. I'm not doing that, but you know, this topic of conversation is about acquisition.
I mean, it sounds like the relationship to historically between marketing and sales, isn't it? You know, marketing generate leads.
100%. Exactly that.
Like
it's the same. Yeah. This is not a new dynamic. This is not a new conflict. It exists already. And to an extent, I think it needs to be healthy, because otherwise, if the retention team had the entire call, then the business objective would be to get to 100% retention, which is impossible. And the acquisition function are like, what do you want me to do? So there needs to be a balance between the two. So anyway, we talked about paid media. Another angle is pricing and discounting and subscribe and save, which I really don't like. I really don't like subscribe and save. I understand why it exists. I get it. And it's obviously a very successful function and it does drive conversion. But you are compromising the value of your products even before the customer decided to take it. So you're presenting a one-time purchase and then the exact same product next to it, they're going, actually, we'll give you 10 to 15% off and you get it recurring. The decision is a price not motivation, it's not a value motivation, which we might talk about later on with regards to product and service. And then the final one is proposition, really. Again, we'll probably talk about this a little bit later, but at acquisition, is the upsell really the right question that you should be asking a customer acquisition? So again, if the acquisition function is measured both on CAC and AOV, which again, I completely understand why it needs to have a ROAS target against it. Are you setting that customer up to fail because you're pushing too much product onto them? And then, in 2 to 3 months' time, they're like, I've got far too much here. I don't need another batch of this product in a month's time. And no, I don't want to skip because I've already got 2 months more than I actually need. So those are the sort of decision points that I think retention should influence acquisition on to improve customer quality and make sure that they're just working together. Now, I recognize, I'm not emphasizing that the retention team needs to have full ownership of the entire funnel, because if that's the case, they would ultimately give acquisition an impossible target. But it needs to be a balance between the two. And I think your comparison, which is B2B sales versus marketing, is a really, really good reflection of other conflicts in other parts of any business that are quite similar.
I mean, with the acquisition side of things, if you're a brand listening to this and you say, look, if I went out and had a look at my acquisition channels and looked at churn of each of them, what do you think they would probably find for most brands in terms of churn by acquisition channel?
Right. That's a good question. And I'm like, I could spend an hour talking about this. I think there needs to be an expectation. There needs to be not an expectation. There needs to be an understanding that naturally some channels will drive better quality customers than others, right? Organic obviously will drive the best quality customers. I would like to think that Meta, in terms of the targeting capability and therefore the customers that are brought through, are warm target audience, because you can essentially target them at a one-to-one level. There are other channels. Weirdly enough, abandoned cart never does well because the customer's decided not to purchase, and you probably come back with a heavier discount and like, oh, fine, I'll take it. And then, it's a discount, so they're not necessarily valuing it in the same way. But I think what's interesting is the blended churn number. If you start splitting that out by media channel, you will start to see some very interesting statistics by way of subscriber decay over 30, 60, 90, 120, 180 days. How many customers that have come through via each of those channels have actually stayed with you for a long period of time? And that's sort of a really important metric to determine the acquisition paid media strategy, is actually how good quality are these customers coming through. Now, the reason I paused to answer that question is one side of it is what channel have they come from, which assumes that they're all taking the same SKU at the same price. That's not necessarily true for the majority of brands that we work with, right? They got multiple SKUs, probably multiple different offers, so that's where it becomes quite complex. But again, if you sort of take the sort of basic logic, which is those that drive better retention over the long run are naturally warmer audiences, and therefore you could argue, subject to data, that those warmer audiences will be more receptive to an upsell versus those colder audiences. But again, if you've got that information by understanding what SKUs they're taking, what their average order value was when they purchased, and then the impact on the subscriber churn, you can start to become really clever with your acquisition strategy by way of products sold, paid media types, a recognition that some colder channels just might not retain as much, but actually we've sort of maxed out those warm channels, so we need to go a bit further. But the danger, I think, is when you start to blend everything together or don't necessarily look at it in any way, that's where it becomes quite dangerous, because then the team is ultimately super busy just running to stand still without really asking the bigger question, again, related to subscriptions, where success is driven not in the initial transaction, but whether that customer stayed with you for a long period of time.
Because I suppose the other thing is then on this is like, you're mentioning all these things here that obviously form part of that relationship. The other thing, which we had John Burt from Craft Gin Club at Econ Club.
Yeah.
And he talked about the sort of like the fact that they've had to heavily discount. They've got into this kind of discounting loop. So like save offers, loyalty pricing, all this kind of stuff that comes with it. A lot of people go down that route. Where does it go wrong for subscriptions specifically when you go down that particular route as a way to, like you say, bring those subscription purchases in early?
So that's a very good question. Let me answer by way of where discounting goes wrong. And then if you don't mind, I'll talk about like alternative solutions. If that's
yeah, perfect.
So I had a very interesting conversation with, I've started posting a lot of videos on LinkedIn, and it's like recorded chats. And I had a very interesting conversation with a consultancy that was based on consumer psychology. And we had a really, really good chat about pricing and discounting. And ultimately where we ended up is introductory discounts. Sorry, there's an ice cream van just outside playing Match of the Day theme song, which is the most distracting thing ever. So introductory discounts, they do set the psychological anchor, which is this is what the product is worth in their heads. So they're making a decision to buy a product based on the number that's on the screen, regardless of whether they wanted that discount initially or not. That's the number that they've got in their head, right? At some point, that will go to full price. Now, when the price normalizes, psychologically, that's seen as a bit of a betrayal, even if it's expected. Even if it's expected, in a way, the consumer is like, well, you accepted that you would maybe give this product away at this particular price, and now you're charging me this price. Now, we probably don't feel that because it's so broad in the market, but that psychologically is what happens. That's what causes the initial churn spike. Like this habit forming, of course it is, but actually you can't deny the fact that price is probably the biggest motivation to whether you want to stay or not. And obviously the deeper the discount, the bigger the churn spike, right? And that's fine. I think so with deepening, so discounts in general or deeper acquisition discounts, it just lessens the likelihood of a long-term relationship, which is where success is driven in subscriptions. Before I go on a little bit further, I just want to talk about discounting in regards to save offers as well. So if a customer wants to cancel, and one of the save offers is an increased discount on the package. We all do this. Like I do this. We've all been with Sky at some point. Like Sky are the worst for it. You want to leave, your contractors are out. I'm going to threaten to leave. They're going to give me a discount. So the cancellation all of a sudden becomes a negotiation tactic. They might want your product, but they recognize that you're willing to be flex on price. So you're building a game, and customers that are just playing it. So I recognize why discounting is important, but there is a huge danger of an over reliance on price, which then is just insanely corrosive. Now, there is an alternative to discounting at a headline level, and it is something that I've started to talk about quite a lot, which is when presenting subscriptions at checkout, you have to think about, if we didn't have the difference in price, what else would the customer actually receive if they subscribe to this product, right? Mm-hmm. And it's actually a change in thought, which is stop thinking about your subscription as a product and start thinking about your subscription as a service. So rather than it being a product of a repeated delivery of the same thing and the same flavor forever and a day, actually think about how can we make the product that's being delivered to the customer essentially a byproduct of the subscription that they've got with us. So, excuse me, go away. Doc's just arrived from the walker. So that's a really, really important way of thinking about it, which is if you start to position and think about the product that you're giving a customer on an ongoing basis as actually a service. So if I decide to subscribe to a product that is going to help me lose weight, outside of actually just giving that product to the customer on a repeated basis, what else are you giving that customer to help them understand the effectiveness of the product that they're taking? So losing weight, I've been trying to lose weight recently. It's taken me quite a long time to do. This is not a 4-week thing. This is like a 12-week thing. So how are you helping customers understand the effect that this product is having on their body, on the nutrition? What's the impact on weight loss? Should you expect any weight loss after 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks? You start thinking about your subscription as a service, there's a less of a reliance on the discounting, because all of a sudden you're giving the subscription a hell of a lot more value and a lot more reason to actually subscribe to the product. So I've started to say the subscription product thing quite a lot, and I think it's landing. Just stop thinking about it as a repeated delivery of the same product again and again, and start thinking about it as an actual underlying service. What can you do to engage this customer, and how can you get them to understand the benefits of taking this product on an ongoing basis?
Definitely. I mean, I couldn't agree more. And I think, I've had conversations like this before with our own clients and also Ecom Cloud Club, in that with subscription, it feels like you need to basically latch the product that you have as part of a system, like you said there with like weight loss, for example. This is one part of a system, to which the other part of the system is that you have to work out, you have to go to bed early, all these different things. So there's less kind of pressure, I think, than on that product itself to do what it needs to do. And equally, like you say, it makes the relationship with that product bigger, because it's part of a wider process that you're having rather than just something you're consuming. So yeah, I couldn't agree more.
The event, the Ecom Color Club that you did last week, there was a guy, I can't remember his name, but he worked for Jude.
Oh, Ollie from Jude, yeah. That's
him. What he was talking about, for those that weren't there, he was talking about this education piece. So Jude is a, how would you describe Jude?
It is a bladder health supplement.
Thank you. I wanted to get that right, because it's obviously fairly sensitive. What he was talking about with regards to the education piece is I've absolutely agreed with what he was saying, in that it's not just about giving the customer the product and expecting them to know exactly how this works. Some of the medications might work for some customers, they might not work for other ones. Some of the medications that they give customers might take quite a long time to kick in. And therefore, it's setting the expectation with the customer as to what to expect on an ongoing basis. I feel like we're probably going away from the point I was making about discounting, but actually, if you start to think about these sorts of things, there is a less of a reliance on the discounting, because you're giving more value as part of the subscription package. It's no longer just about the thing that you get. It's about everything else that comes with it. And that's where it makes it really, really appealing. So another point, which again, I posted a video on this the other day. Years ago, I used to work for Sky Sports and the subscriptions team. So I was responsible. I was part of a team that was responsible for getting more people to subscribe to Sky Sports, right? And Sky Sports, the main pool is always live sport. It always is, and it always will be. But what we were ignoring was the video on demand recorded content. If you go to the Sky Sports library, you can see highlights, documentaries, and so on. We just weren't paying any attention to that at all. And so what we did is we realized that, and we started to push that. And what we realized is actually that started to drive A, retention, and B, better acquisition quality, because there was something else that was leading a customer to go, oh, I don't want it for this game. I've got loads of other content. And the same practice we're talking about here. Add more tangible value to the subscription product without really having to change what you're doing. It really drives quite significant benefits. You're on mute, by the way. Oh, I can't hear you.
That is not a good move. I was saying love it. And I think
I've been distracted by, excuse me, ice cream vans, dogs turning up, like
me on mute. The joys of live podcast today, Craig. I want to talk to you now then about passive churn.
Yeah.
What is it, first
Yeah.
of all? And
Yeah.
secondly, why do so many people, brands, founders not maybe even know it's happening?
The passive churn is basically payment failures. So customers that were quite happy subscribing to you and the systems kick them out because the payments failed. That is a problem in subscriptions. The best context that I can give is and assume a brand has no payment recovery function whatsoever, including dunning. A credit card has a 3-year lifespan. So the likelihood of a customer being booted off, the likelihood of a customer having a subscription for longer than 3 years is 0 because the credit card's expired, right? Obviously, you don't get a card and then subscribe immediately. There might be a customer that subscribes today, the card expires next month, right? There's this underlying problem, an underlying assumption that all churn is driven by a customer decision. That's not true. There is an underlying churn which is driven by the technology basically booting them out because the bank is basically said computer says no, right? It is available. It's a metric that's available through all the leading subscription technology providers, but it's not really being paid attention to as much as I would hope. Now, so ultimately, like passive churn is quiet churn, but the key thing is it's entirely fixable. There are many different ways of preventing a high level of passive churn, which we'll probably talk about in a sec. But if brands aren't doing anything about it, they're leaving money on the table. These are customers that were happy with what they were buying, and the systems kick them off. Now, the frustration that I've got, and this is not directed at anyone, this is maybe just directed at narrative, is winning those customers back by emailing them. Now, that is great if you've identified a problem that passive churn is maybe kicking customers off and you need to email them to come back. Like, of course, and that's one of the tactics in order to do so, but don't rely on that. That's like the last thing you should do. So we'll sort of cover off in a second the different items that I know that are available either within Shopify, within the payment provider, or within the subscription platforms, which are products that are ready to go, that have massive return on investment opportunities, but they're just not really part of the conversation, and I'm never really sure exactly why. So there are sort of 4. So the 5th one is dunning, which I think we're all familiar with, which is payment retries, contacting customers to try and get them to update their cards. But that's like the final one. The ones that precede that are one called automatic card updater. So again, if credit cards expire in 3 years' time, there is a system that automatically updates the card before the next purchase is taken. It's in the name. There's another one which is quite similar called network tokens, which the outcome is the same, but the way that it's done is different in that there is not a card number that's applied to the account, but actually what they call a network token. Again, what that means is if a card is lost or it's updated or whatever it might be, it's not affecting the underlying churn. So there are systems in place that can deliver that. There's intelligent retry, which I know a lot of the subscription tech platforms offer. Either you can set the strategy itself, or there's actually quite some fancy AI functions. We mustn't forget, intelligent retry is a very useful mechanic that should be switched on by everyone, because you're essentially relying on the data that exists, the mass data that exists within these subscription platforms to make the decision for you when to next try that subscription payment, rather than you trying to make the decision yourself. You then have the option within Shopify to provide alternative payment methods if, God forbid, your existing payment method fails, and only then should dunning play a part. So there are 4 things that you should consider to optimize your passive churn before even thinking about dunning.
Love it. And I think what's interesting here is I haven't heard these being talked about at all on any podcast, because we're too concerned about the fact that how things look at the front end. And ultimately, I think that this is one thing that annoys me a lot about e-commerce and the world that we're in, is that we care far too much about the very front end, pretty marketing aspects, but the deeper operational, things that actually turn the needle, a lot of the time do not get looked at properly enough.
Yeah,
so
it
thank you for bringing up.
No, that I couldn't agree with you more. And it comes back to this analogy that we were talking about. Your roof is leaking, but you bought a mop. I can turn around and go, but the floor is dry now. I have solved the problem. And actually, if the roof is leaking, so the roof is payment failures, the mop is dunning, you're not really solving the problem. You're waiting for the payment to fail, and then you're doing something. And there are preventative measures for payments to improve performance and essentially repair the roof. And then, yes, you probably still need the floor, because you probably have a small percentage of rain coming through, a small percentage of passive churn that can only be solved by dunning. But the problem is significantly worsened. And sorry, this is where FILDI is specifically designed to help. It recognizes the importance of the existing retention setup by way of communicating to subscribers, but it takes more of a holistic view to go, there are other ways of solving the direct problem rather than treating the symptom. Yeah, that's what FILDI has been specifically designed to do, because this all happened at corporate, and these are not corporate specific items that cost like a lot of money. These are fairly standard services that are available to startups and scale-ups who use Shopify and the relevant systems. Like it's just, to your point, it's just not being talked about, but the opportunity is huge.
I think it's one of the things a lot of the time that when you have this conversation about subscriptions and email, is that it never really kind of goes this deep. So I hope a lot of people have taken stock to what's been discussed here, because it's gold, guys. So do what you will with it. But look, I'm going to go. Exactly. I want to go back though to that first mop that we talked about, which was email marketing Klaviyo. And I think, look, to be fair, you have been very balanced in terms of talking about the impact of different things within subscription. And you haven't obviously said that, look, email marketing is not, it is a waste of time. But I think what you're making is it's being used for the wrong things at the wrong time. So in terms of email and sort of lifecycle marketing, where does that fit in, or where does it leave it in terms of the subscription world that we find ourselves in? Yeah,
look, you've already said this, but let me be clear, just in case anyone's listening. Email marketing has a really, really important role to play in subscription success. But you're also right, Adam, that it is being used to solve problems that are not within its capability. It's the mop when the roof is leaking, and it's the emphasis needs to be on fixing the roof to make sure that you're using the mop in the right way. So email or communication, WhatsApp, SMS, whatever, however you're communicating to subscribers, is a communication layer that sits on top of a system, right? If the system is broken, then the email is noise, beautifully crafted, very well sequenced noise, but noise. It is unnecessary. If you have a good underlying infrastructure, you can use the communication layer to drive better engagement, to really understand what customers want, rather than solve problems, keeping your team busy solving problems that shouldn't have existed in the first place. Within the problem that I think email is trying to solve, and one of the reasons I think it is maybe overused, is that the performance metrics are relatively easy to understand. Open rate, click-through rate, attributed revenue, we talked about this before. But those metrics measure email subscriptions. They measure email performance, not subscriptions performance. So just because an email's performed really well doesn't necessarily mean as though your subscriptions business is any sort of the wiser. The flow performance and subscriber retention, it's not the same thing, and conflating those two basically means that brands stay busy whilst the churn compounds. So essentially they're looking in the wrong spot. They're thinking that email can solve the problem, but again, it's treating the symptom, not necessarily the problem. And where email does work well, and it's not exclusive within these particular areas, but I'm going to pull these two out because I do think they're fundamentally important, again, within subscriptions. It's a really, really good activation tool. It's a really, really good habit former. If the habit is already built, you can't rely on email to set the habit itself because we get hundreds of emails a day. It's also really good for onboarding. Really, really good. But activation and onboarding are two of the areas where I'm like, you need to be shit hot on your email in those or SMS or whatever in those specific areas, but not exclusively within those areas. But those are the areas that I think it works really, really well. Again, if subscriptions is a service and not a product, email, WhatsApp, SMS should be the communication layer for that service. Build the service and use those channels to communicate the benefits and what to expect and that sort of stuff. So communicate the service benefits, the education, the reinforcement. But the important point here is the role that email plays. So if email is the communication layer of the system, the service that we're talking about needs to already exist somewhere for email to then use that to engage with customers. You shouldn't rely on email to be both the communication layer and the service, because I think you're putting too much emphasis in the wrong area, and you're putting too much reliance on email. And you're making the customer confused. Yeah. I've got hundreds of emails. How am I going to remember an email that was sent a week ago? I'd rather get a link to something where the service exists. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but you kind of get my point, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, one thing that we've definitely seen in the past sort of 18 months is, from a CRO point of view, with subscriptions and the messaging on PDPs, the benefits of being a subscriber have become a lot more important in actually converting people. And not just the fact that, you get a regular shipment and all that kind of stuff. It's all the additional benefits of kind of, the content, the fact that you can get early access. All these are the things that get brought in. Those are the things that are actually converting people to get subscriptions, rather than the fact that, look, it's convenient and it's a cost saving, because frankly, not many people give a damn about that anymore, because it's just kind of as a standard. I've got one last question before we kind of round off, Craig. And I think, look, you mentioned there about email marketing and saying, look, it's all relatively straightforward to understand the metrics. And I agree with you. I think my question for you though is that if you are going to, I guess, look under the hood of a subscriptions business, what does it look like, or what should you be looking for in the signs that things have been done or built or set up properly?
So what? Okay. The way that it works with FILDI and how FILDI sort of get involved in the initial conversation is an audit. We take a look at subscriber data and we analyze it, and we spend a day or so on the information to then help both FILDI and the client understand where the problem may exist. So again, churn is not driven by a single metric. It is probably influenced by many different things, or it might be influenced by something specific which is hidden in something else. So it's really, really important to actually understand what is going on. And that's the sort of initial audit. And then from that point, we go, okay, so we identified the problem to be specific in this area. Let's focus our attention and our attention to improve retention in this specific area. But, it's really about, it's like, I was going to say know your numbers, but that's such a vague thing to say. There needs to be a desire, or at least a recognition, that whilst a problem may manifest itself through a symptom in a specific area, it's not about solving that symptom. It's about actually trying to understand where the problem manifests and solving that problem. That is where it becomes really game-changing for subscriptions businesses. for a couple of reasons. Number one, performance improves. But number two, you can ensure that your team is working on the right thing, rather than trying to limit the amount of customers that have actually left and will never come back. Actually, it's trying to understand why those customers left you in the first place, solving that problem, which means that you have a team whose time is relatively freed up in order to improve the customer experience, to focus on any other areas to improve the business, rather than necessarily reacting to a customer problem. That's what I think is really important. And again, FILDI exists to take that holistic view across the entire subscription ecosystem, which is why we've worked together. Like, we actually focus on very different parts of the customer journey, but we're entirely complementary. I've really enjoyed working with you because we can have that conversation by going, here's what I'm seeing on my side. What are you seeing on your side? How do we think we can solve this problem? And I do fairly similar work with other agencies as well, because taking a holistic view is all very well and good, but actually it's about bringing everyone together to understand, how do we actually solve this underlying problem now that we've identified it? And that's the way that FILDI is set up in order to try and tackle that problem.
Excellent. Craig, look, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, both personally and also on podcasts. Another belter. Can't remind us, Craig, if obviously people want to find out more, obviously press you a little bit more about what they're doing subscriptions wise, what should they do? Where should they go?
So I am ever present on LinkedIn. So my name is Craig Niven, and I run an agency called FILDI, FILDI. So you can find me on LinkedIn, just add me and have a conversation. My website is fildi.co, FILDI.co. It's very garishly colored. You will definitely recognize it. And that gives a bit more information in terms of, who FILDI is, what we do. It's got a contact thing on there as well. I'm really happy to have a conversation with any sort of organization that either has a subscriptions business or is thinking about a subscriptions business. I come from, like I say, very, very, very deep subscriptions expertise. So I can have conversations of subscriptions at any level, be it detailed or fairly basic. I'm happy with either. And then it doesn't really matter where you're based around the world. I'm very happy to have a conversation.
Superb. And just to echo from my side, guys, look, as Craig said, we've worked together on joint clients before. And Craig really does bring that extra level of expertise that many agencies, I guess, look, in the Shopify space, don't have as much experience of. So definitely worth reaching out to him if you're a brand, if you're an agency who needs some support in that area. Craig, thank you very much, sir. And guys, thank you very much for joining us today again for the Ecom Club podcast. If you've liked what you listened to, do give us a like or a follow on the listening platform of your choice. And we'll be here again, same time next week with ECC Podcast. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Ecom Collab Club podcast. Make sure you like, subscribe, and join our community at ecomcollabclub.com/community.